Thank you, Ken. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not used to either microphones or suits, so this is kind of stepping outside my box here. Okay. My name is Brent Curtis. I am with the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. I've been there since the year 2000. The Nebraska Emergency Management Agency obviously has jurisdiction over the entire state, and we only have 37 full-time employees. So as a result, all of us wear a lot of different hats there. So as such, in addition to being the voluntary agency liaison, I'm also in the field of communications unit leader and communications unit technician and the individual assistance program lead and other duties as assigned. And before I was with NEMA, I was an American Red Cross Disaster Services volunteer, and I still have my amateur radio license. In fact, the reason I'm kind of with NEMA is because I wanted to be a storm spotter. So clear back in 1997, I decided I wanted to be a storm spotter, got my ham technician license, and in 1998, I found myself in this very auditorium watching Ken and Brian Smith give their presentation on storm spotter training. So this is kind of a weird little full circle thing for me today, but it's just kind of fun. So with that being said, we're going to talk a little bit and just kind of a crash course about what is NEMA, what is the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. As you can see up there, that's the official definition. In a nutshell, it means we're looking out for persons and property and trying to correct their vulnerabilities to disaster, either through mitigation activities, such as building safe rooms, planning activities, exercising activities, and of course, response to events and recovery to events. And that goes for any type of disaster, be it natural, technological, or man-made. And the reason we do this on a state level is because although all disasters start and end locally, as we've seen frequently, disasters can quickly expand beyond the local resources ability to deal with. So when a disaster exceeds the local resources, they go to the state, and the state brings in their assets, be it the State Patrol, Department of Roads, National Guard, whatever resources are appropriate to the disaster. And then when it goes beyond our resources, that's when we reach out to our federal partners, the Federal Emergency Management Agency and other federal agencies to coordinate that in. And then as it scales back as we transition from response towards recovery, that's when the feds step back, hand it back off to the state, and then as it scales back down further where it's within the local capabilities, it starts and ends as a local disaster. So today we're going to talk about June 16th, the tornadoes we had in northeast Nebraska and the response to them. The National Weather Service, as I understand it after me, is going to cover this in much better and much more knowledgeable detail. So I'm just going to kind of glance over these just to paint a picture for you. And then if Brian's somewhere in the audience, he'll be pleased to know I used the updated graphic he gave me last week on this. Basically, on June 16th, right from the get-go at 8 a.m., we knew it could potentially be a bad day. We looked at the Storm Prediction Center's convective outlooks, and basically anytime we see that red or moderate in there, we know it could be an active event, and we plan that there's probably a greater likelihood of having a tornado watch somewhere than not having a tornado watch. So even as early as 8 a.m., we were kind of revved up and waiting to see what happens. To that end, we have a duty officer system where their entire job is to monitor what's going on. We also have a response and recovery staff, of which I'm part of. So we're looking at radar. We're looking at the National Weather Service's chat system. We're looking at the products put out by the Storm Prediction Center in terms of mesoscale discussions, convective outlooks, and that sort of thing. And we're taking reports from the local emergency managers. Because even that morning, we had 3-inch hail in Saunders County, and a number of other storms rolled through that morning that had us on alert already and getting reports from local EMs. So at 2 o'clock on June 16th, the National Weather Service held one of their decision support briefings, which comes in the form of a conference call and webinar where they give us the information on what they expect to happen. And at that time, they expected a damaging wind threat, large hail threat, and a significant tornado threat north of an Omaha-Lincoln-Grand Island line. At that 2 o'clock time, before they'd sent up their afternoon weather balloons, and they can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it was just prior to that, they expected the timing for this to be between 5 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon. It happened a little bit quicker than that. As of 3 p.m., thunderstorms started forming south of Norfolk near Madison. And 10 minutes later, we had a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch, number 303, issued for a large chunk of north central and northeast Nebraska. And at 3:26 p.m., the cloud tops were significant and great areas of concern for us. And then basically, that's when everything kind of hit the fan, so to speak. This is the updated graphic I was talking about. So again, if you see Brian, tell him I'm using this. He's going to be really thrilled that I'm not using the outdated one. So we had that tornado watch issued at 3:10, and then we have our first tornado warning just scant 30 minutes later at 3:41 for coming in Stanton County. 2 minutes after that, a law enforcement officer did report the first tornado on the ground. It passed west of Stanton, as you can see in the graphic there. It originally started out very weak, but as it moved to the northeast, it did increase in strength and damage several farmhouses up there. That one dissipated approximately 4:11 p.m., having traveled a little over 12 miles on the ground. Prior to that one even dissipating, though, we had the second tornado develop south and west of Pilger. This was the big one that, this was the first of the twins, so to speak. This is the tornado that moved from the southwest to the northeast, came through Pilger and destroyed approximately 75% of the village. What you see here in this picture is at the bottom left, you see the fire station, and at the top left, you see, or I'm sorry, the top right, you see the village clerk's office. Because of that first tornado warning that was issued at 3:43, the Pilger Fire Department had deployed on mutual aid to do search and rescue in the Stanton area for the damages up there. So they had already rolled out of their fire department. They were headed down the highway when they see tornado number 2 forming, and so had headed towards Pilger, so they call into dispatch and say, we're stopping right here, we're going to wait and see what this one does, and they had to stand by on the sidelines as that rolled through Pilger. And the reason I have the village clerk's office up there is in Pilger, the village clerk is actually responsible for manually sounding the tornado siren. The village clerk, among a number of other duties, is also on the fire and rescue squad. So she was in the ambulance deployed to go to do the search and rescue. So she made a quick phone call, got someone else over to the clerk's office, they sounded the sirens and then took shelter. So Tornado 2 is moving through Pilger. Tornado 3 is forming on the ground south and east of Tornado 2, and that's where we get a lot of those twin tornado pictures. Both tornadoes track east roughly 4 miles before Tornado 3 starts to weaken, and again, this is an area that the National Weather Service will cover in much more knowledgeable detail than I can. But as you can see on the map there is a point where those two tornadoes crossed, and unfortunately, that was over an actual occupied residence. All these pictures are of that residence. The gentleman basically heard the first, or saw the first tornado coming, took shelter in his basement. As that one passed over, it completely blew away his house right off the foundation. So all he has left is the walls around him and nothing above. As he climbs out of the basement with his dog, he looks off to the southwest and sees the second tornado breaking through the trees. At this point, he goes down into the root cellar adjacent to the house, takes shelter in there, and watches as the second tornado decimates his property again and actually caves in the walls of the house that he had just taken shelter in the basement. So caved in the basement walls, so that's a little bit of a lesson learned on where you take shelter in a basement, because we did see several instances of where the tornado damage was such that with the top of the house removed, the basement walls just caved in. So as we've got tornadoes 2 and 3 dissipating, tornado number 4 forms. Tornado number 4 did strike Wakefield on the Wayne and Dixon County line, damaging a number of structures and destroying homes up there. And basically throughout this entire process, all we could do back in Lincoln was really watch and get ready for the next steps. We monitored these via National Weather Service, via the National Warning System Circuit, where dispatch talks to the National Weather Service and vice versa, via radar, and we actually, thanks to the benefits of technology, we actually just pull up live storm spotter feeds via the internet. So those storm spotters going out there doing those live uplinks, we were actually able to watch live, unfortunately, as that tornado smashed through Pilger, and it gave us a much greater situational awareness. So if there's any folks out in the audience that are doing that or want to do that, we thank you, because that gives us increased intelligence on what's going on the ground. As soon as it happened, we had several state agencies or emergency support functions, ESFs, responding on the ground up there. We had the Nebraska State Patrol up there. There's a number of photos of them helping and assisting with search and rescue. Nebraska Department of Roads, obviously, is helping barricade things off, and other emergency support functions were quickly activated, and the State Emergency Operations Center was almost immediately opened. So how those reports came in, again, the tornado more or less struck Pilger at 4 o'clock. Within an hour of that, we had our first report from a county emergency manager of damages in northeast Nebraska. A couple hours after that, at 5:41, Susan Epps of the American Red Cross, who is our mass care emergency support function coordinator, arrived at the state EOC. She coordinates the mass care aspect of it in terms of the Nebraska VOAD, the American Red Cross, Salvation Army, other responses. She's not in charge of them, but she just helps us maintain an overall awareness of what they're doing and provides that coordination piece for us. Immediately after that, the State Patrol put in the incident log that their command post is on standby and ready for deployment. And then 6 o'clock, NSP reports they're getting ready to put together an aerial surveillance flight. A lot of you have probably seen that on YouTube. If not, it's easy enough to find. It's an excellent video of the immediate aftermath. 6:28, NEMA begins activating our field team for deployment the next morning. Basically, that means I get a phone call that says, pack a bag, we don't know when you're coming home. 6:40, we get notified by the Salvation Army that they've deployed resources up there for mass care and mass feeding. And backing up a little bit here in terms of the county EM reports, at 6:04 we got the report the Pilger Fire Station had been destroyed. At 6:59 we got a call from the Wayne County Emergency Manager that homes had been damaged in the Wakefield area. At 8:30 p.m. the emergency manager in Norfolk had notified us that we did have one fatality. 17 folks were taken to the hospital for injuries in Norfolk. And then at 8:40, the Cumming County Emergency Manager did let us know that we had one additional fatality from that event. He knew of at least 50 buildings destroyed, 20 to 30 buildings damaged, and at least 100 cattle dead at one feedlot after the tornado strike. I think the final cattle count came out to around 800, thereabouts, between two different feedlots. And there was obviously more homes damaged than that. As the Nebraska State Patrol went up in the air, we obviously got a better idea of what kind of damage we were looking at in the Pilger area and the vicinity surrounding it. So in summary, basically thanks to these 4 EF4 tornadoes, in less than 2 hours, we've had 4 counties, 4 adjacent counties severely impacted by tornadic events, Cumming, Dixon, Stanton, and Wayne. And then the icing on the cake is we deploy on June 17th. And on June 17th, up in Cedar County, they get their own little tornado outbreak up there that impacts the Coleridge area. So on the border of Cedar and Dixon County, we have a mini tornado outbreak that damages a number of homes up there also that we have to be concerned with. So this is just a quick summary slide showing the counties that are affected, where they are in Nebraska, and then the storm paths in those. In a nutshell, we were looking at widespread devastation across a large area. So our damage tallies from that across those 5 counties is we counted 93 homes that were completely destroyed, 22 homes that suffered major damage and probably irreparable, 93 homes that were minor damage, and then another 23 homes that were affected in some way, and that could be anything from windows broken out to shingles missing to dings in the siding. But across those 5 counties, we were looking at a total of 231 homes that were directly impacted by this storm event. And the response to that was unprecedented. We've seen storms, the tornadoes near Hallam in 2004 that caused greater damage, but the national response we saw, especially on the voluntary side, was absolutely unprecedented to any disaster we've had before this. This is just the logos I could find. I'm sure there's organizations on there I'm missing, so if there's anybody in this room that's with an organization I missed, I apologize. But this is just a smattering of the ones I could find that did respond directly to northeast Nebraska. So now, stepping forward from June 16th to June 17th. We obviously spun up a lot of state agencies. We had our State Emergency Operations Center activated, and we put a lot of boots on the ground up there on the morning of June 17th. I think I reported to work at 4 a.m. to get our mobile command post rolling up there. So we had NEMA on the ground, State Patrol, the Nebraska National Guard up there, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Health and Human Services, Fire Marshal, and even the Nebraska Forest Service was up there, providing a variety of assets. So what exactly did all these agencies do up there? We're there to provide guidance and assistance. The county sheriff, was the incident commander. We were there to support him in whatever capacity we could. We're not there to take charge. We're there to assist. So we help them with the coordination of the daily incident action plans, putting together those operational briefs and operational plans for each day. What are our goals and objectives? What's our safety plan? What's our weather? What kind of personnel do we expect? What kind of equipment do we have? Getting all that information outlined in a daily report for each operational period, yeah, we can step up and help with that. We also helped with the public information and emergency public information piece. We, between the village clerk, our state public information officers, and even our federal partners, FEMA's external affairs officers, we coordinated that daily press release, and sometimes more often than daily, to get that information out to the public on where the volunteer centers were, who was affected, what kind of donations were needed, and more importantly, what kind of donations were not needed up in that area. We provided them with debris sorting guidance. Thanks to the Department of Environmental Quality, as soon as volunteers got off the bus in the Pilger area, we were handing them sheets saying, this is how you need to sort the debris. You need to put the woody debris here, construction debris here, potentially hazardous chemicals here. We did that right from the get-go, and that made a huge difference in our debris management efforts. Asbestos inspections, again, we have a lot of homes that are missing maybe 2 walls and need to be knocked down. Before we can have a voluntary agency come in and level that house, we need to go through and make sure there's no asbestos in those houses, so we have a state agency that takes care of that. Volunteer coordination and donations management. Those were expertly handled on a local level, but because of the national involvement and the outpouring of national support, there was a coordination piece that had to happen on even the state and federal side just to assist the locals in that. And then site security and traffic control and traffic direction. That was a coordinated effort between local law enforcement, the Nebraska National Guard, and the Nebraska Department of Roads. Everybody had an input into that piece to make sure folks got where they needed to go and folks that didn't need to be there stayed out. And there's probably other resources I'm missing. We had a lot of activities going on in that area, and this is just kind of a nutshell version of that. But when we look at what happened in there, again, as I've mentioned, we had a huge voluntary outpouring of support, and in a lot of ways, the volunteers were the real heroes up there. So even as early as June 17th, the Nebraska VOAD, Salvation Army, American Red Cross, Team Rubicon, all these others were on the ground in Pilger, and we had other agencies contacting us that were getting ready to respond. The plans were laid for the Volunteer Reception Center, and the Nebraska VOAD did begin activating with daily conference calls to handle that coordination piece to make sure everybody was on the same page and not duplicating their efforts and getting resources where they needed to be. And then almost immediately, the affiliated volunteers started arriving, and others notified us of their intention to arrive. And some of these organizations I had never even heard of prior to this disaster, and that's kind of my job, which makes me feel a little silly. But like Information Technology Disaster Resource Center there on the top left, I had never heard of these guys, but they were absolutely invaluable at the Volunteer Coordination Center. They came in, and basically they had a white school bus that was loaded with information technology and commo equipment. They outfitted the Volunteer Coordination Center with phones, radios, internet, laptops, copiers, printers, basically resources they didn't know they needed, but they sure came in handy. Tool Bank Disaster Services is another one I hadn't heard of before, and they only sent, I think, 2 volunteers. But with those 2 volunteers came an entire semi-truck full of hand tools and power tools that they were able to dispense out and aid in the recovery efforts. So even though it was just 2 volunteers, the contribution they made was incalculable. All Hands Volunteers, another huge organization, along with all the others on here. They just did an amazing, amazing job up there in terms of the volunteer piece. And the volunteer piece was absolutely huge. Just from June 18th to the 23rd, we had almost 1,500 volunteers each day. The majority of these were spontaneous and unaffiliated and not necessarily skilled in debris removal or what was going on up there. So these folks needed to be registered. We needed a short skill assessment, what they felt comfortable doing, what they were dressed in. Were they wearing flip-flops or work boots? Did they have sunscreen? Did they have bug spray? Did they have work gloves? Did they have hand tools, safety glasses, all of these things? We needed to get them through that. We needed to give them a safety briefing. We needed to get them personal protection equipment if they needed it, tools. But the most important thing they needed once they got there was coordination and supervision. We can't just send out 100 volunteers and say, here, go clean up that block. It's not that simple. So that's, again, where these voluntary agencies come in. Team Rubicon pretty much ran the operation up in Wakefield. They sent me daily incident action plans on what they were doing up there and requested volunteers as needed. Southern Baptist, All Hands, and Samaritan's Purse were coordinating things at Pilger. These folks worked together to supervise all these unaffiliated volunteers that were coming in and basically provide management and leadership and oversight to these groups working throughout the Pilger community. So it was something that we didn't have the resources to do, that these volunteer groups were able to come in and step in and provide incalculable assistance with. And then all of these voluntary agencies that were on the ground in Pilger, I met with each day up there to make sure we had everything we needed going forward for the next operational period. So looking at the totals for the volunteers between June 16th and June 23rd, in that short period, we had almost 10,000 volunteer and responder check-ins for a grand total of 65,821 hours. And in terms of equipment that was donated, which could be anything from a UTV to a bulldozer, we had 588 pieces of equipment registered and checked in with a grand total of over 5,300 hours. So when you combine the volunteers, the responders, and the equipment, we're looking at a grand total of over 71,000 hours that were basically donated to that community in disaster response. And where that comes into play is on the public assistance side. When Pilger is trying to fund their cost share of like debris removal, we can weigh in that and the feds will give us credit for those volunteer hours and help offset that cost. So in essence, just getting the debris out of Pilger, it was easy to put it in piles, but putting it in piles is one thing, you want to get rid of it. So just to get rid of all the debris that was in and around the Pilger area was over $1 million project. And thanks to the voluntary hours contributed, Pilger's cost share from that was exactly zero. So the volunteer efforts made a huge difference up there in terms of helping that local community cope with the cost of this disaster. And the results were pretty much immediate. These are pictures that I took in Pilger. The top row were taken roughly 24 hours after the disaster, and the bottom row was taken as close as I could get it to that same perspective exactly 1 month later. So in the top row, you can see the top left is St. John's Church. And you can see the streets have kind of been cleared at this point, at least to get equipment through. But obviously, there's still debris everywhere. You can see the large pieces of the co-op silo there at the top right of that picture. And then the top middle picture is a residential street where it was completely blocked by piles of tree branches taller than I was. And then the top right picture is kind of looking downtown towards the bank, and then you can see one of the co-op silos there to the right. And then 1 month later, you can see that they've actually got that debris completely cleared there. They've still got their little bell tower there, and I believe they have broken ground on rebuilding the church as of right now. In the middle bottom there, you can see that they've removed a number of those damaged houses, and then on the bottom right there, you can see that again a lot of efforts have been made towards debris clearance. And the work is still continuing to this day. On the left side, you can see the co-op, and I apologize, I should have a more up-to-date picture of this. This is the latest one I took, probably October, November of last year. Since that time, all those silos are up to full size, and the co-op is almost fully operational up there with plans to possibly expand. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the Mennonite Disaster Services are in there building houses. Basically, in coordination with the long-term recovery group they have up there, they've got the Mennonites coming in and building houses for residents. As long as the cost of materials is supplied, these Mennonites will take the materials and turn it into a house, and all the owner needs to do is be handed the key and furniture. It's going to have appliances. Everything's going to be built according to spec. And so the long-term recovery group's been working hard on that. At this point, they've got 7 houses scheduled just for the Mennonites to build, and then there's a lot of other folks doing their own private construction up there. So rebuilding efforts are continuing up there. There's a long-term recovery group dealing with individuals and families. And there's also a community rebuilding committee that's been meeting regularly, kind of looking at what their vision is for the future. So these folks have been coming together and trying to decide, in a nutshell, because of the devastation that Pilger received, they're trying to plan out what the community is going to look like and the benefits their grandchildren are going to enjoy. The recovery isn't going to be immediate. It's not going to be 1 year. It's not going to be 2 years. In terms of the trees, it's not even going to be 10 years. But it is an effort that's ongoing, and Pilger takes a lot of pride in the response for, and that's kind of where they're at today. So with that being said, that kind of wraps up my presentation. I've ran through a lot of information here to try to get you folks as much of a full picture of what's going on there as I could. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those at this time.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, I have a microphone, and I look out here, and I'm glad to see so many people. If you raise your hand, if you have a question, I'll run the microphone to you, and it's a neat challenge watching the old guy run around the room. Ready? Ha! Oh man, it's one of my former students.
I was just wondering, how many safe rooms have been built in Pilger since the tornado has come through? Do you know?
I don't believe any have been built yet. However, Pilger has been given a hazard mitigation grant to build them. And if you wait 5 minutes after this, I can probably get you a number because I know I got emailed on it just this last week. I believe there's probably around at least a dozen hazard mitigation grants for it. So hopefully at least 12 of them will be going in. Because of the floodplain issues in there, which is a whole nother long discussion, there is a lot of interest in safe rooms in there, and a lot of folks are looking towards doing that.
More questions? Put a hand in the air. It's going to be on the test. Oh, that is so nice. I don't have to go anywhere. Thank you. Here.
How do we get in touch with the NOAA, the Canine Rescue Group? I've never heard of them, but how do you get in touch with them?
I tell you what, if you can get me your information after this, I will make that happen for you.
Hang on. All right. Is it your hand? All right, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how were communications affected after this hit? That is, as far as like two-way radio and public safety communications?
In terms of public safety communications, we were actually, other than the tornado siren that was destroyed, which was kind of a public safety communication system, communications were largely unaffected. We were fortunate in that it didn't affect any cell towers. It didn't affect our state communications assets, and local communication assets were mostly located out of Stanton, which is approximately 8 miles west of there. So as a whole, communications were unaffected. There was a need for additional communications up there, which we were able to meet through our resources, but the existing communication infrastructure wasn't directly impacted.
All right, another question back here.
Did they decide not to rebuild the middle school or the elementary?
Basically, what's happened with the middle school is the project going forward on that is, as it stood, Pilger and Wisner were combined school districts. So in Wisner was an elementary school, the high school, and then in Pilger, the school there, which was over 100 years old, unfortunately, and destroyed, as you can see there in that picture, housed the 5th and 6th grade. The project going forward from this is they're actually going to combine pre-K through 12 onto one campus, which is the current high school site, and expand that greatly. So it's unfortunate for the community that they're not going to rebuild the middle school there, but it's going to be a better service to the students going forward to have all their resources in one place. Pilger is actively working on something to do with that site, and so is the school. They're trying to coordinate their efforts there. So there's a potential for maybe a distance learning center there or something along those lines, but there's still a high interest in that site.
One last question. Any hand want to come up? It's really, if it's next to me, that'd even be best, so I don't have to run. But I'll run. Any other questions? Yes, in the back. I've got to run back there. I'll be back to you in a minute or two. Okay, here we are.
Brian, would you put these storms in context for the spring and the previous tornadoes of May, for example, and how that affected the agency's responses?
In terms of the Mother Day tornado and the severe weather around that actually helped us quite a bit. It gave us, I don't want to say a practice run because it certainly wasn't, but we actually had some resources already in place that in terms of like long-term recovery, we already had a FEMA volunteer agency liaison working with long-term recovery as well as some other volunteers that basically all they do is bounce around the country setting up long-term recovery groups. So because of what happened in those May storms, we already had those resources here to draw upon and move up into the northeast Nebraska area. And that greatly expedited and structured the long-term recovery process. And in terms of the state agencies, it gave us a chance to work with our NRAT team, which is a Nebraska Resource Accountability Team. It's local emergency managers that do all the credentialing on the disaster. So if you've ever been to something like this, you get issued one of those, they scan your driver's license, they give you one of those tags, check you in, check you out. That's how we know we had 65.X number of hours for each person, et cetera. So having exercised that so recently gave us I hate to say good practice, but it was good practice. It was a smaller incident than what happened in northeast Nebraska, so it gave us a foundation to build off of for that.
Thank you very much. One more time, thanks.